Hey guys, what's going on? This is David Chen, and you are on another edition of Panoramic's Podcast, New York Weekly's #1 podcast for 2020. And today we have a very big man in a very big space, Jason Feifer, the editor-in-chief of Entrepreneur Magazine. How are you doing today, sir?
I am well. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming on. You know how I found you was we have a lot of mutual friends. Kim Perrell is one of them. David Moss is another one. And I'm seeing them following you. They're liking your comments. David's one of my partners. Met Kim a couple times. Looking over, and I go on, and I see the most positive and inspirational messages, very similar to what we do on Panonomics. And I thought to myself, that's so different from any editor-in-chief I typically see, anybody I see out there. But you're really inspiring. Is that one of the main reasons that you consider yourself a very successful person, like I would say?
Oh, look, I really appreciate that. That's so nice. I think that it is not the reason, but it is the outgrowth of it. So I had a long career in media. I say had, I still am in media, but for most of my career, I really thought of myself as a magazine editor. My job was to show up, tell stories, not really have a direct relationship with the audience. And then when I became editor-in-chief of Entrepreneur Magazine, I something very weird and interesting happened, which is that people started treating me differently. Like they understood me differently. They understood me not as a guy who makes magazines or tells stories or whatever, but they understood me as a guy who can help them with entrepreneurship. And I was honestly not prepared for that. And I didn't really know what to do with it at first, right? They were like, tell me things, tell me your wisdom. And I was like, I don't have wisdom. I find wisdom from other people. But I realized that I had a massive opportunity in front of me, which was that if I could adapt to what people expected of me, then I could at once do my job, but also fulfill this new vision of myself and find this new path forward, which is, I think, what entrepreneurs do, right? I mean, you spot the opportunity. What's the market telling you? And then you figure out how to shift towards it. And so I spent years just trying to understand, how can I be useful? Not just the work that I create, but me personally. And the more that I understood entrepreneurs and the more that I be transformed into an entrepreneur myself through a production company that I have now that I produce all sorts of other media from, the more I realized that this was where I was most natural, was in being excited with people and being along the journey with them and understanding that the thing that they needed was the thing that I could provide, which was a vantage point that most people are not fortunate enough to have. I can talk to everybody. I see how the story plays out. I see people at the beginning, in the middle, the end of their journeys, and I understand that the setbacks along the way are just part of it. And that helped shape the optimism that you see.
I love that. I feel like, as I'm looking on your social media, the most obvious often distracts from the most important, right? Mm-hmm. And that's such an empowering statement, because the most obvious things that are there, if it's not focused towards your goals, it's a distraction, right?
Yeah.
And it's so obvious that it exists. And I think a lot of entrepreneurs, including myself, sometimes get distracted by things that don't matter, because entrepreneurs get to do everything. Everything matters all the time, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, that you almost feel this guilt. But when you put that on your social media, what does that mean to you? And what can the audience learn from that?
Well, that one in particular, the obvious distracts from the important, it comes from a couple different places. Number one, you just nailed it in the way that entrepreneurs struggle with this. There is, of course, the shiny object syndrome, and there is the you show up at work every single day and there's like some fire to put out, or there's some need, and it's very easy to think, well, this is the most important thing that I need to be focusing on. It's what my friend John Taffer, the host of Bar Rescue, likes to say, that people work in their business and they work on their business. And you have to remember that those are distinct things. You work in your business, you show up every day, you make sure that the business is running, but you better be able to step back and work on the business as well, to think of the big picture of it and make sure that everything is growing and is in line with your vision. And so that's one way in which I was thinking about that. But there's another side of the work that I do, which is that through this podcast I have called Build for Tomorrow, and some other writing that I do. I'm very, very interested in broad ways in which change happens, and the way in which the conversations that we have today about how things are bad, or where the narratives of fear that we have about progress, how those are often driven, I think, by a misunderstanding of what people are looking at, and also a very short-term view of how change happens. And so I'll just give you one quick example. This is a bit of a change from the entrepreneurship stuff, but I think it's a really important lesson. So back in 2011, do you remember people talking about Facebook depression?
That's right.
Yeah, Facebook depression. It was a thing that doctors were talking about. And so, you turn on CNN or CBS News and everyone's talking about Facebook depression, reporting on Facebook depression. And what is that? Well, what it was a belief that had been transformed into a medical diagnosis, that the more that teenagers spent time on Facebook, the more depressed they became. Very concerning, right? And so the conclusion that you might draw very naturally would be, well, if we don't want our kids to be depressed, then get them off of Facebook. Get them off right now. But with a couple more years of research, what we found is that the very early studies into the impact that social media has on teenagers, we're finding a correlation between high social media usage and higher incidence of depression. But those early reports weren't finding a causation. Right? It was a correlation that people expanded into a causation. So there are more depressed teenagers using Facebook more. That is a true statement. But it is not a causation, it's a correlation. So now with more research, what we can definitively find is that in fact there is no identifiable cause in which increased usage of social media leads to increased mental health challenges in young people. I know that sounds very counterintuitive, but it is actually true. This is what the research shows. Amy Orban at Cambridge has been a leading researcher in this, and I would suggest you find her work. But anyway, the reason that I'm telling you about this is because the obvious seemed to be, oh my gosh, these kids are depressed, they're using Facebook, that must be the problem, let's pull them off of Facebook. But now that we know that it was a causation, what actually is likely to be true is that depressed teenagers were using Facebook more, perhaps because they were finding communities of people like them who they were able to share with and bond with, and they felt more of a community there than they did with their in-person community. And if you yank them off of Facebook because you think that you're helping them, what you are actually doing is hurting them, because now you're taking away a community that they had access to. So the obvious distracts from the important. The obvious is, oh my gosh, this thing is leading to this thing. The important is, let's figure out the solution, the actual solution. I think that oftentimes when we jump to conclusions about what is wrong with something, we actually inhibit our ability to identify good solutions. And good solutions is what we should want a lot more than obvious accusations.
I love that. In the world that we're currently in, when I hear things like that, we're heavy into esports, right? We're big in esports.
Yeah.
We do a lot of that and what we're trying to do. And what I've realized when I talk to parents, right, as an ex-Deloitte managing partner going to esports, people look at me like, you're crazy. How'd you get into video games? And I said, have you seen the Sports Illustrated? They said, yeah. I go, that's one of the teams we're a part of. What they don't realize is it is a community, and it is exactly what you said. People are building, people are understanding each other more so now than ever, especially during the pandemic. They were really just talking to their friends. They're trying to find that. And I love that you've identified that, because the reality is solving the problem and not jumping to conclusions really helps in a long-term commitment instead of a short-term game, right? And I think a lot of entrepreneurs and business people mess up on that because it's the quick money now, the flashy money now, the egotistical drives that exist. And like you said, you've talked to some of the most richest, most amazing, most successful people. But I think the one thing you and I probably realize is they're not necessarily the most happy people, right?
That's right.
But the happiest people are the ones, in my opinion, who are the most abundant and caring, compassionate, that genuinely care. And for some strange reason, it all works out, right? The synergy and the energy of the people around you really makes it work out. And I love that. as I'm scrolling through some of these amazing podcasts that you have, and I love them, you're talking about Build for Tomorrow, which was formerly Pessimist Archive, right? And
That's
Problem Solvers podcast and Hush Money podcast.
Mm-hmm.
How did you come up with those 3 different titles, and how did you identify the needs of that for the entrepreneur community?
Oh, well, great question. So, and by the way, I got to say, what I said about Facebook depression is absolutely ported over. I mean, the research backs it up to video games. These conversations about kids being addicted to video games, oftentimes let's be clear. Overuse can occur. I mean, there's a big distinction between addiction and overuse. I talked to a bunch of addiction researchers, and it drives them crazy that people talk about technology addictions, which is not an actual thing. Overuse is certainly clear, and sometimes there's absolutely nothing wrong going on, and in fact, the video games can be providing a kind of community and bonding and even skill sets that are going to be very useful outside of the digital world. But if there is an overuse occurring, the problem is not the video game, right? It's not that this thing is too addictive, that kids are trapped inside of it, right? That Nir Eyal, a wonderful writer, wrote a book called Indistractable, talks about the 3 psychological nutrients that people need, which comes out of it's great psychology research, and I'm blanking on all 3 of them, but they are oh my gosh, you know what, you should cite, before you cite things, you should have the whole thing loaded up in your head before you do it. But anyway, the point is that we when we look at children's lives, sometimes we find that they are not getting everything that they need for a healthy life from a school environment, from a home environment, and so they may turn to games as a way to fulfill some of those things. And what we need to be doing is making sure that we're creating a great balance of what they're finding wherever they're finding it, and then you can create a more healthy balance where gaming is a wonderful part of their lives. And so I really caution people that if they're concerned about an overuse of gaming, to not be thinking about the gaming, but to be thinking about what's happening outside of the gaming as a really important way of looking at it. Anyway, so all that to be said, you asked about names of things. The most important one that I would draw your attention to is Build for Tomorrow, because like you said, it started out as Pessimist Archive, which doesn't sound optimistic, does it? Pessimist's Archive. People would always ask me, why do you have a show about pessimism? And I would say, listen to the show, you'll find it's not pessimistic. The idea was that Pessimist Archive was supposed to be an archive of pessimists. I wanted to look back in time at why people were pessimistic about things that today we think of as totally commonplace. Why were people freaking out about the teddy bear? Why were they trying to ban coffee? And because the more you can understand these past fears, the better you can understand our current conversations, right? You can learn a lot about why people wouldn't get on an automatic elevator that you could, in like the 40s, that you can then apply to why people are afraid to get into self-driving cars today. And so that really interested me. But the name was a big turnoff, and I hired a company called Pen Name Consulting, and their audience insights researcher Rochelle DeVoe spent all this time digging into my audience, understanding the things that they liked, but also the things that were holding them back from listening to the show, from recommending the show to others, and so on. And one of the big things was the name. The name was just too much of a turnoff. It was too much of a barrier to entry. And so even though I had been running the show for years with that name, and I thought the name was clever and everything, I felt like, you know what, you have to make a sacrifice here. You have to understand what people's experience is and how it's different from your own, and then adapt to it. And so I went in a different direction. I wanted a name that communicated that optimism and progress forward thinking, and Built for Tomorrow did that, and it has transformed the show. I mean, you feel like you don't always know what your audience is thinking until you literally go out and ask them.
I love that. I love how you take this word that a lot of people would not understand why you did it with such a positive person, and then you flip the switch and made that a very positive thing. And I think that is such an impactful, thing, because a lot of people don't really realize what you're trying to get out there until they actually listen and hear it. That's a beautiful thing. You hear a lot of stories about entrepreneurs, and ones that are very, very successful and ones that haven't had the opportunity to be successful. What do you think separates both of them besides a little bit of luck, which you and I both know always helps a little bit, right?
Sure does.
But what are some of the things that you see that are different from successful people and unsuccessful people in this world?
Ryan Reynolds once told me that you can't be good at something without being willing to be bad. And I honestly think that very simple observation also is a really true and powerful answer to your question, because it's an important one, right? How do people with the same skills, or if not the same skills, the same ability to learn those skills, how do some become successful and some don't? And you're right, timing and luck plays a part. But I the more that I talk to people, the more I see this, a big part of the answer is that the people who are really good at things were willing to be bad at them for a very long time. They weren't discouraged. They had a vision. They were able to hold true to that vision. And they were able to adapt, to rethink who they are and what they do. And you talk to people who are at the top of their game, and they are at the top, but the path they took there was very, very unexpected. And maybe they're at the top of a totally different game. I mean, I'll use myself as an example, not to claim that I'm at the top of anything. I think that I'm still quite along the journey, but I am running this magazine, Entrepreneur, which puts me in a real unbelievable position. But 5-10 years ago, the running Entrepreneur, that would have never occurred to me at all. Ever. I mean, I started my career being interested in music. I guess I would have been interested in running like Rolling Stone or something. Entrepreneur? What? But this is the path that I took because I continue to rethink. I continue to experiment. I put myself out into the world when I didn't honestly really have the skills to do so. I mean, I look back at some of my earlier work and it's garbage, but I knew that the only way to get good at something was to be bad at it. And I think that filters out a lot of people.
It does. It's so uncomfortable being bad at something, having everyone beat you up. You at times beat yourself up, and for some reason, still get up and still walk this journey of entrepreneurism to finish the things you want. And I see your journey, what you've done. How did you get into this? You talk about the when you weren't expecting to be the editor-in-chief of Entrepreneur Magazine. You said something before. How did you get into that? How did that happen in your story?
Well, so there's the philosophical answer, and then there's the very boring, kind of actual this, then this, then this. So let me tell you the philosophical answer, which will make the this, then this, and this possibly a little more satisfying. This philosophical answer is that I have throughout my career done this thing that I came to call work your next job. I didn't always have a term for it, but I do now, and it's work your next job. And it goes like this. In front of you, in front of me, in front of anybody, we have two sets of opportunities right now. Opportunity set A, opportunity set B. Opportunity set A is everything that's being asked of you. So you show up at a job, you have a boss, you have tasks, you have to do a good job of those things. That's opportunity set A, what people expect of you. Opportunity set B is everything that's available to you that nobody's asking you to do. And that can be at your job. That can be other tasks, responsibilities, and so on. It can be outside of your job. It can be things that you can learn just because you're interested in it. In the way that nobody asked me to make these podcasts, just made them by myself. And what I have found throughout my career is that opportunity set B is always more important, because if you only focus on opportunity set A, you are only qualified to do the thing that you are already doing. But opportunity set B is where growth happens, and it's where transformation happens. And you don't know when you get into it what the ROI is going to be. Like you don't know why you're doing something, but I promise you that it will pay off in random and unexpected ways. So to your question, how did I end up an entrepreneur? Well, a couple jobs ago, I started, I was a magazine editor, print magazine editor at Fast Company, and they started a video department. And I was interested in being on camera. I didn't know why. Nobody asked me to do it. I didn't need to do it for my job, but I just felt like it was a useful thing to learn. And so I learned how to do it. I got some great direction. I learned how to speak on mic. I learned how to make eye contact with the camera. I learned how to be engaging. And that skill set then led me to be able to speak on stage and to start these podcasts. And then eventually when I'm interviewing to be editor-in-chief of Entrepreneur many years later, one of the things that they really liked about me, I mean, this wasn't like the core thing, but one of the things they really liked about me that maybe put it over the edge was that I was able to go out and advocate for the brand. I'm good on camera. I'm comfortable on camera. You can put me on TV. You can put me wherever. I'll do it. And that means that in a way I got that job at Entrepreneur, and I'm talking to you because I stood in front of a camera with the video department at Fast Company many, many years ago. You can't know how these things are going to work out, but what you can know is that the more that you put yourself in positions to learn and grow, the more opportunities you create in the future.
I have to completely agree with that. I mean, you talk about adding value, and a lot of people misconstrue that. There's, when they're working, they're saying, this is all I'm going to do, and here's where I'm at. And that's what you said, A. And B is, let me add value and learn from it. But there's a critical function. You're learning skill set and things that most people will never, ever understand and learn. And you become the expert in these fields. And I always tell people to Google it, but there really is a sense of learning. And I love that you did that because you had the opportunity to do that, because you went from something that was just out there and you had no real end reason besides the fact that you wanted to learn it to become better at what you did. It led you to where you need to be. And a lot of people are afraid of that fear, and it stops them, right? It wholeheartedly stops them.
Sure does.
Why do you think that is the way it is?
Why does the fear stop them?
Yes.
Well, that's a good question. I mean, I think that there are any number of reasons that the fear stops them. One of them is stories. One of them is that they don't have the story, the framework, the reference point of other people, either people that they know or people that they relate to, who went through it and got on the other side of it. And this is a reason, obviously not the only reason. You couldn't possibly simplify it down this much, but when you look at more emerging economies around the world, countries with more emerging economies, you don't find the same level of entrepreneurship that you find in developed economies like the United States. And when I've talked to a lot of people a lot of entrepreneurs in these areas, and they say that one of the, simple as it sounds, one of the really powerful things that their markets or their countries are missing are the success stories, the Steve Jobses, the people who quit their, the Mark Zuckerberg, the people who quit school, started something in a garage, it went wrong a million times, and then it changed the world and it turned them into billionaires. And you need those stories in order for your entire support system to understand what it is that you're doing. If you're surrounded by people who don't understand that taking a risk and building your own thing and being bad at something for a while is a viable path, then they're going to be very discouraging of it, which is going to make it harder for you to feel confidence in yourself that you can go forward and do this. So I think these kinds of stories are really important. And it's the reason why I love and really try to amplify when very successful people talk about how bad they were at things, because that is part of that growth. That's part of laying that foundation for other people to say, oh, I didn't realize this person who I admire really sucked at this for a long time, like really failed over and over again. And so I always prompt that stuff out of people. I mean, everybody, like literally everybody I've talked to, and that's gone from I mean, I'm just thinking of people I've spoken with very recently. Ray Dalio, billionaire, Maria Sharapova, tennis star, The Rock, everybody. I prompt these stories of failure out of them, not because it's like just kind of fun to hear, but because it's important for other people to hear, to understand that success is not predestined. Because the more that you can hear that story, the more I think that you can understand that the ups and downs are a natural part of your journey too.
1,000%. Everybody really just, especially on social media, they go out there and they show you all the highlights, right? Highlight reel, but it's not real. It's not REAL. It's hard. It sucks. It's not easy. You learn. There are days that you don't want to do this. There's days that you just want to quit. There's days that what they're saying is right, but inherently inside of you, you just got to keep going. And if you can share that story and provide hope to the masses, it's amazing. Which is why I led to this question on your website, what I learned when I changed, right? You're very vulnerable when you're talking about this. You're actually sharing your story on how you change the pessimistic podcast and why people want to go from there. But you're teaching that on your site too. Explain what you learned when you changed your brand.
Oh, well, when I changed my brand, man. So first of all, the reason that I do it is because I know that it's valuable to people. And it's funny, people tell me that they're so glad that I take this risk and put myself out there and share my ups and downs. And I always tell them, I mean, like, I appreciate that, but it's not a risk. It's not a risk at all. It's, in fact, the least risky thing, because I know that you like it and I know that it's valuable. And I know that if you did it too, if you went and shared your own failures, that people would gravitate towards you because of it. So sharing this kind of stuff, it builds bonds and it builds community. And so I forgot what you were actually prompting me to talk about. What was the failure?
When I learned what I learned when I changed my brand, how those failures have changed your brand.
Oh yeah, right. So this goes to the I believe what you're referencing. This goes to the changing from the Pessimist Archive name branding to Build for Tomorrow. And what I learned most of all in doing that was that, number one, you may think that you know what your value is to other people, but you don't until you really dig into it with them. And I just can't encourage that enough, because you will discover that people are experiencing the things that you're putting out in the world in a just totally different way, or a deeper way, or a more intriguing way, or something. People are so smart, and they will take what you're putting out and they will fit it into their lives, or they will do something with it. And the better you can understand that, the better you can actually serve them and grow your own brand. So another thing that came out of that audience insights research that I talked about, it wasn't just the name change. It was also, Rochelle asked why. She asked, what do people get from my podcast? Why do you listen to this? And they told me, or they told her, therefore told me, that it helps them feel resilient about the future. And honestly, I didn't know that. I didn't know it, and it wasn't what I set out to do. I set out to kind of have this. I started a little more academic. I was like, I want to understand change. I want to understand these historical weird things that happened, like the teddy bear freakout of 1907. What was that about? I didn't understand that it was fitting into people's lives in a tangible way. And once I understood that, I knew how to relate to them better. I knew what they saw when they saw me, and I knew how to shift the work that I do in ways that no longer felt honestly as scary as before, because now I'm not taking shots in the dark. Now I have a mission and I have a vision, and that vision and mission is shaped by the people who I've already connected with, and I can create this virtuous cycle. So what I encourage you to do is to basically follow this path, which is to say, put something out in the world, then discover that your understanding of it is like totally wrong, and understand that some of the things that you're doing are detrimental to your own success. But in the process, you will have started to refine an understanding of who you are and what your relationship is with your audience. And you will then be able to really take those great steps towards being good at something. We've talked about being bad at something to be good at something. This is what it looks like. You put something out in the world. Some of it is good, some of it is bad. You figure that out. You have hard conversations. You take a hard look at yourself, and you revise.
Wow. So much knowledge, so much fire, so little time, but we really appreciate you coming on. Now, Jason, let everyone know your social media handles and also your website so they can give you a follow.
Yeah, no, thanks. I appreciate that. Also, before I do that, I'm gonna just add to, or kind of correct what I had said earlier, because I couldn't come up with the 3 psychological nutrients that Nir Eyal had told me when I was talking about the video game stuff. So anyway, what it is competency, autonomy, and relatedness. These are the 3 things that people need to be happy and comfortable: competency, autonomy, and relatedness. And you can imagine how a kid who doesn't feel supported, maybe at school, at home, doesn't feel that they are competent, that they are autonomous in their own life, and maybe that they are connecting with their peers, relatedness, and those are all things that you can find in video games. And so you can quite understand why some kids are going to overuse video games, because they're not finding competency, autonomy, and relatedness in their lives. Now, you can find that in your in-person life, and you can find it in video games too. And I think that's great. That's a fantastic balance. But let's make sure that if a parent feels like they're observing a problem, that they don't think that the problem exists in the video game, because it very likely doesn't. The video game is likely, in fact, some kind of compensation for a problem elsewhere. So anyway, if you want to hear more about that, there's an episode called "You Are Not Addicted to Technology" that is on my Build for Tomorrow podcast. So Build for Tomorrow, You Are Not Addicted to Technology. You'll hear a very deep dive into that. So anyway, check out Built for Tomorrow. And then two other things. My Instagram is at Hey Feifer, HeyFeifer. Follow along. As you said, I'm kind of pumping out optimism there on a constant basis. So I would love for you to follow along and be in touch. And then also I have a free audio course on my website, which is jasonfeifer.com. You just go there. You can't miss it. It's a button that says free training, and it'll help you become more adaptable. So you can go jasonfeifer.com, free training, and that's what I got for you.
I love it, Jason. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for making the world a better place. I love the energy. That's what we need out there. For David Chen, Jason Feifer, New York Weekly's #1 podcast for 2020, Pananomics. We'll see you guys next week. Thank you.